Carl said, God is a universal truth, and I am the next Jesus. And there is a note here, Carl, so I want to be sensitive about this. The note from our Carl screener said that you wanted us to know that you are on the spectrum, like my son is autistic on the spectrum, and also has ADHD, like my son, and maybe dyslexic as well. So you have these sort of, you're not neurotypical, so to speak. So A, is that true? And B, I want to make sure that the claim I read is correct, that you believe that God is a universal truth and that you are the next Jesus. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to just slightly alter you. It is correct, but it was
Okay.
a slight missing. And what it does is it actually says you were actually true in introducing the little warning and the side note to put in, because the first part of the claim, it says, I have a delusion that says God is universal truth.
Oh, okay.
Well, not Christ, actually, next Jesus. I just got a link onto Christ somehow because of like the sort of, I grew up in, I suppose, both an atheist and a Christian background. So
Okay.
I was really partial to both sort of understandings as an outsider, as you described me a little earlier, which was cool. I like that. So
Okay.
I would like to just bring you back to the fact that I said this as I would normally do it for a specific reason. And what it is, I'd like to just start with the first part of my claim, which then helps you guys see my world a little bit. And I also put a few disclaimers so you understand that we've taken precautions to understand that even though I do have a tendency, because we are dealing with delusions, to maybe get a little erratic, at any point my wife and care team here feels that's happening. They're watching the show with AirPods in, by the way, so they'll be happy, but they can still see me and hear me as well.
Welcome.
We will do the grown-up things, suggesting to you guys that I'm actually not coping, guys. This has been a great experience. Can I recover and come back next week? Does that sound like an amazing deal we can make if I do struggle?
Oh, absolutely. 100. We always encourage repeat callers, especially if they're as polite and straightforward as you.
Okay, well, with that, then it removes a little, what I often, the little delusions I have. I can see the little delusional. We would often call them phobias, yes? So little phobia is that if there's a problem, I might have an issue in communicating. So the part that says it's a delusion, let me explain this little part separately, because that obviously covers a lot of things that we need to understand from the beginning, and that is that I am described by medical professionals as having ADHD, as we said. My relationship with that, as you may see, that might be a difficulty, but it's not a difficulty because, again, I have something for it, is I lose track of time. And I can also lose track of where I am in the story to try and describe it in another manner because I'm doing both things at the same time in my head. At any point that's happening, of course, just ask me to say, hey, Carl, can I ask you to take a breath? And at that moment,
Understood.
take a breath, I'll stop everything, and then I'll listen to you guys, because I'm not here. I want to make the most today is about making a friendly environment and hopefully moving past that friendly environment and trying to explain why I've called in today and why I've been practicing this for almost the last year.
That sounds great. I think, just so you know, I think you're doing an excellent job. And so why don't you go on to explain to us what the story that you want to start with. And if I feel like it's running on, I will jump in and we are a call-in show that needs to sort of get to the point at some point. So why don't you hit your first point and we'll see how that goes.
Yes, I'll do it. Okay, and so the delusional part for everybody to understand is with all the things I've been diagnosed with, they say this has led, because I didn't get it sorted when I was young, and as a child, I experienced a lot of abuse in many areas, except for sexual, as far as I'm concerned. Sorry if that was a bit too broad. I didn't think then. So, but like, it's okay. That's the truth. We don't need to speak about this. It gives you an understanding of me. That's all. And the things I've dealt with, and I'm actually brilliant with now. But like, just so you understand. And from that, I formed delusions of grandeur. And what this means to me is, a delusion is just a fractured. And something that's true to me is true to me. But something that's like, I'll give you an understanding. I'm not attacking you, but I'd say atheism is an illusion that appears to be true. But because you guys don't claim that there's no God because there's evidence of no God, I believe that's, it's just lack of evidence there's no God, which then turns God into more of an ambiguous term, which then causes all the friction. I get that, but that still is an illusion because nobody can actually say for sure there is no God. So that's why I call it a truthful illusion that I've lived by for many years. But a delusion to me is another truth that actually says, wait a minute, this also could be true. Do you want to Do you want to weigh this up? So I get a lot of these. And so I found ways, and I want to say thank you to your show, because it's been one of those ways. It's not more you new guys. I don't know you as well. Sorry about that. But I know people like Matt Dillahunty and Tracy Harris, Jen Peoples. I watched back then, and they helped me with a lot of the delusion I was suffering from at the younger age, because they were very biblical. I think a lot of people were starting to get biblical ideas in my head. And but I mean theistical ideas, things built on faith and things. And my delusions were building them. So you guys.
Well, why don't we jump to? Can you describe? You pick one delusion. You mentioned delusions of grandeur. Does this feel very real to you on a regular basis?
It feels realer than anything so far anybody's ever told me that God is real. There's a universal truth. But
understood.
What I found is to explain it to people in many different ways. I have a really, really difficult time, because it leads to things that don't make sense in my head, and then I spiral out of control. I found a linear path to this, which says if I can just first form with you, get rid of sort of like little fears, I'll be able to say it correctly. Otherwise, I will spiral out of control. And that's why I said, if I go too long on for you guys, you can just say we can call back next week, and this will be a good.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I will say, to try to put you at ease, I mentioned this earlier. I have a son who is autistic. Okay. He's on the autism spectrum. He also is diagnosed with ADHD. He also has some developmental delay. So I am very familiar with some of what you have gone through. Okay. So I can empathize a little bit there. And I do want to encourage you to take your time. But I agree with your strategy that maybe we do it one chunk at a time. And today I want to get to just the first little bit of it so you're comfortable. And I think you've already done a great job being vulnerable and telling us, hey, I think I've been told I have delusions, or I'm experiencing these delusions, and one of them makes me convinced that God is absolutely real. We should probably talk about that for a few minutes and then let you take a break and maybe call back next week. Yes. So let's talk about that one, when you feel that God is real. Does that result in I have many questions. So first, I think the most important question for me is, how does that translate into an urge in your mind to take any particular actions? Like, is God telling you to do something, or is there a particular type of God, or is it just, I believe that there is a God, I feel that there's a God, but I don't feel compelled to do anything because of that? What are your thoughts there?
I can answer that, but I can't answer in the way that you asked me to answer it. It's very difficult for me, because it doesn't line up with how I see reality. But I understand what you're asking me. So if you'd let me have a crack at this, I'll speed ahead in the next step then, so I can get to something just before getting to my claims, so we can speed this up. Okay. So to answer all that, and to help me actually move on to, talking about why it's real to me, is I don't claim that I feel it's real. I claim it is real as a universal truth, as what you would describe as a Gnostic would claim it. So in one respect, I would say I was a Gnostic, but I claim myself to be a disciple. And what I mean by this word is, inside me, because this is very new, there's a part of me that I love that's helped me all along defeat these delusions called scrutiny and skepticism. And you guys have helped me with that. But at the moment, everything you guys have helped me with, and anybody's ever helped me with, have failed to this new delusion. So this falls at 1%, and this 1% is trapped in a logical paradox I can't get out.
Yeah.
And so the only way out really is to accept God is real where I am at. And I've gone there at a 99% capacity of saying that's 100% a surety. But because I want to leave room to find out that, look, I have delusions. So I've got to leave room for someone like you guys to maybe come in and help me find a pathway back to say, hey, Carl,
sure,
looking at this maybe a little bit differently to us. This is what we do. So what I would say is Gnosticism to me, this is how I form it in my mind, is to say that is the only true version to understand the one true God. You can't do it as a theist, because if you can't point to the one true God, I don't believe you could call yourself a Gnostic, because you don't know. You may claim to know, but that's the way I perceive it in my mind. So there's only Gnosticism, but then the invert of Gnosticism then is when you find you don't know, because you've reverted back to maybe a survival sort of instinct in us, which looks at things more subjectively to help us to survive. Because I think humans' greatest survival tool is more our subjective nature and our way we can lie and keep secrets and deceive each other. It's more of a survival technique I've learned that we've used. I've noticed in children, my children, me as a child, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of true to me. So I'm not
okay. Well,
I'm just saying that's why it's formed.
I do want to jump in right now and say I think this is a good place for us to sort of respond and take a break and maybe have you call back next week, because we've gotten the first part out and I hope you're comfortable. I do want to ask my co-host John, do you have any sort of
I'm having difficulty because I haven't finished what I'm saying, so it's causing difficulty to me because you can only discuss half of the whole thing. But I can.
Well, yeah, the problem that I have, Carl, if I find honesty is the best policy, right? We've been on for 10 minutes and on to 11 minutes. It is a call-in show, so I think it's best when people have lengthy explanations or detailed or feel compelled to have detailed conversations that we do it. I think your idea was great. Let we do the tip of the iceberg. We address that and talk about it a little bit, maybe with you offline, so you can listen to our thoughts and note what we get wrong as far as trying to understand where you're coming from. And then you can call back again next week, or when I'm on as a host again, or when John's on as a host, and we can continue the conversation. So I'm gonna pause you, put you on mute for a second, and hear from John. John, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I don't really have too much of a thought, just because, like, I'm not exactly sure where we're going in the conversation. But I mean, as far as, like, I guess, recognizing, this delusion of a God, which maybe I'm misunderstanding what the caller was trying to say, but like recognizing it as like, oh, I'm deluded into thinking that there is a God or something like that, and then coming back from that, I think that. For me, what kind of helps is just recentering myself to realize that the natural world has natural phenomena that is explained naturally. And so, like, in order to, posit a God or to make a God more credible, or at least the most likely conclusion, you would need a whole lot more evidence in order to suggest that God is responsible for it. And so, like, just recognizing the role that nature plays in our reality, I think, could be a good start. But yeah, maybe I don't understand where the caller's going with his discussion here.
No, I think I agree with you. I think Carl gave a very good baseline to say, hey, here's where I'm coming from, and I understand his reticence to really jump in with both feet, and he wanted to level set with us as far as expectations about his ability to even communicate these concepts. And I really applaud him for calling in. I do think that hearing us talk about it after the fact maybe will give him some points to think about and come back with next week. My main takeaway, I found it very interesting, Carl, when you said, I'm 99% there, but I'm holding this 1% back so that I can, and I'm going to call that 1% your skepticism. I think that's how I perceived what you were describing that 1% as, hey, I'm convinced 99% of the way that this is a truth for me, but maybe, I'm holding this 1% back to say, maybe there's ways that I can be unconvinced. And I don't have a lot of experience personally or professionally with delusion. It mostly comes from, I do have a friend who is a psychiatrist, and I talk to her sometimes about it, but it is unique to every person. Is the one thing I've learned, is you can never just make assumptions. So I really don't know what you are going through. I do encourage you to listen to what we've said in this show and previous shows. The hosts you mentioned from a long time ago are the same ones I listen to as well. They are excellent. We also tend to try to help as well. So to you and all the people who were listening with you, I really do applaud you calling in. I would encourage you to keep that 1% open, because if you become convinced of something that's wrong, right, then you can get into trouble, so to speak. You can cause a problem for yourself or for people around you. So that's one way to sort of always be checking to say, what evidence do I have this is true? Is it just a feeling? Or do I have actual evidence? And not just evidence of what I think, but evidence of what I remember and evidence of what other people witness. And if all of that doesn't add up to support my feeling of I'm a supreme being or there is a God, I can remain skeptical, and I can at least sit at I don't know. And I don't know is a perfectly great place to be, because I don't know prevents you from making drastic mistakes. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I got this investment and I'm gonna need 10 grand from you, but you're gonna make $1 million in 6 months, and you sit at I don't know, you're not going to give them your 10 grand and lose the money. Right. And so that's what I would encourage you to do there is to think about that. And I do want to thank you, Carl, for being here with us. Is it something that you can do where you can call back again at a later date and sort of continue the conversation?
Definitely. What I'll do is I'll join again next week. I'll give you a week to prepare. I have another interview set up. I just wanted to. I heard you guys, and I think it's very fair for things you're saying. It's difficult because obviously I didn't get to where I wanted to get, as the other host pointed out, and I understood that. But if I just get to one little thing before we go and just say, then I don't leave you with food for thought to say, okay, so with knowing there's a gap in between that needs to be explained. If I said to you, God to me, as a word, is defined by a definition that says that which has authority over all things.
Okay. That's fair enough. I think you can take that definition and say, if such a thing exists, how do I know it exists? And from whence does that authority derive? And those are two very good questions to go and look at. So thank you.
Great question. And it can be answered by saying the objective reality proves it exists. The relationship you have with it, which is truth, proves it exists, because they all follow that definition. And then obviously what we use, which is the logos, to prove that it exists. And for you then to use that very same thing as an authority to deny it would then put you in a paradox to state that you have to claim that this is not authority. And because you have no other word to describe that which has authority over all things, and that description alone in itself, it's a paradox. It says it's the only true definition of God.
I understand. I am going to move on to another caller now, so I appreciate your time with us here. I will say regarding the last comment that Carl had, is starting to sound a lot like presuppositionalism. You can't explain logic, therefore I win. It sounded a lot like arguments from definitions, which, Carl, I would encourage you never to say because you don't have a definition or because it doesn't match a definition, therefore this argument makes sense. I don't care about definitions. I don't think anybody that's as serious at having these discussions does. You define X as anything, and that's what X will be for the purpose of our conversation. So I would focus on the evidence, and I would focus on keeping that skepticism open, because it's better to be safe than sorry. You don't want to be taken in by anyone, including your own brain, to be tricked into thinking that something's true when it's not.